I'm going to introduce you today Mr. Dave Noble, former CEO of 2CER. So we've got just about all the regiments covered amongst the people working in CJOC right about now, where Dave and I also work together. He's going to bring today CESAR, a look back in history at engineer airborne capability and northern deployments. And as we all relearn things, we should be most thankful to have people from the extended engineer family come back and remind us of things we used to know. Dave?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. General Lordy, various colleagues. A little bit of colleagues, otherwise I'll miss somebody and then I'll be annoyed at myself for a while. Thanks very much for this chance to come back and tell you about something that happened 30 years ago. Something which, in my experience, draws blank looks if you mention it. An indication of how bad we were back then at establishing our stories and our legacy putting forward. I want to tell you just a little bit about the airborne side of the engineers as we did it then. There's many went before me, many came after, but this is my story, so you're stuck with it. To set a little bit of atmosphere, this was a song that was pretty popular in Petawawa in the early 80s among the junk fraternity, as you might imagine. And I even kept an old piece of headdress. And even 30 years later, I find that the maroon beret has the same effect on me. My head swells and my brain shrinks. I'm going to use notes because otherwise, at my advanced age, I'll start to yeah. So I'm going to tell you about CESAR in three parts. First is why CESAR, why do we do it, and it's actually very timely, and I'll get to that in a second. A couple of details of the actual operation as it happened, a fairly major airborne operation, and where might we go from there. And just to set the scene much better than I can, I'm going to play a short 2-minute video clip. Jacques, if you could run that for now, please.
North Pole, there's a new trail being blazed by a hardy group of engineers. Actually, the blazing is a snow clearing operation, and the trail is an airstrip. It's the beginning of a Canadian scientific expedition that will conduct experiments which have never been attempted before. We have the very first pictures from the expedition. Terry Molesky reports.
CESAR, roger, 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 over.
This is Ice Station CESAR, drifting slowly on the Arctic ice cap. The feeble blip of light in the sky is the sun, which shines, if that is the word, for 24 hours a day. It is minus 50 degrees with the wind chill here, and a handful of humans are trying to carve an existence out of the ice.
Quite a challenge.
Hans Weber is the team's chief scientist, and he's doubling as a CBC cameraman. His advance party of 4 men has spent the past week struggling to put up windbreaks made of snow blocks and shaping an igloo outhouse for the larger team which will follow. This, by the way, is Leif Lundgaard, a legendary Norwegian polar specialist who spent 20 years in the Arctic because he likes it. The advance team landed here in a Twin Otter equipped with skids, their mission being to act as a ground crew for a spectacular parachute operation by the Canadian Forces Airborne Engineers. They dropped bulldozers, a grader, and equipment for a 3-month stay right onto the polar ice cap. These men are mostly 20 and 21 years old, and they're all volunteers who actually seem to enjoy it all. The engineer's job for the next couple of days is to clear the snow off the ice and make an airstrip so that the scientific party can land Hercules aircraft here. The purpose of all this is to study the little-known Alpha Ridge, which is a 1,000-kilometer ridge on the floor of the Arctic Ocean. It could turn out to be a mineral-rich extension of Canada's continental shelf. Ice Station CESAR, then, will be a base for some experiments never before attempted on a part of the Earth which today is less well known than the Moon and almost as hard to get at. Terry Molesky, CBC News.
And that's the national.
All right, pause that for now and come back later on. And if you can recognize the anchor here, you're of a certain age, I think, right? Old Nash. So, interesting coincidence, just about 3 or 4 months ago, Cinquième RGC built an ice strip on a lake in northern Quebec and referenced CESAR as one of the historical things that have led to it, and that's good to see. The name CESAR, just so you know, was not a military creation. CESAR, the acronym, Canadian Expedition to Study the Alpha Ridge, came from Energy Mines and Resources, now NRCan. Their creation, and they're pretty proud of it. I'm going to pass 2 files around here. This yellow one is basically just a collection of currently available scientific papers. I'll explain their significance in a second. Every one of them has a reference to CESAR and the data that came from it in there. And for General Winnick, there will be a test on this portion of before we look at it. This is more like scrapbook stuff here, just some pictures and some data from the exercise itself, the operation itself. So why OpCESAR? Well, it's all to do with the Arctic sovereignty, with our sovereignty, with the continental shelf. And it really is an extension, if you wish, of what engineers have been doing in Canada since the country was created. We had engineers in BC, you know, building Yale Road. You all been around Chilliwack, you know the roads there that all have an engineer history to them, Rideau Canal. In the early 70s, there were many engineers engaged in building airfields in the north, in Pond Inlet, Dorset, Grise Fiord, places like that. You up there, General Laurie? Yeah. 2 bridges on the Dempster Highway followed rapidly after that. Also built mostly by, in that case, by 3 Field Squadron, which connected Dawson City to Inuvik. The Jekyll Bridge over the Yoga River, and Jerry Barr built that one. And the Eagle River Bridge over the Eagle River. Steve Irwin talked about that one a little while ago. So lots of sovereignty exercises, measured in different ways perhaps than classic sovereignty, but nevertheless sovereignty. CESAR in a slightly different context. This was designed to support the scientists who are studying our continental shelf with a view to acquiring data to make a claim that this actually belongs to Canada, in the simplest sense. The Alpha Ridge, as you saw on the diagram there, is approximately halfway between Alert and the North Pole, runs northwest, or roughly east-west. There's another ridge you may have heard of, called the Lomonosov Ridge, a little bit further north, another underwater mountain range, equally the target of a lot of international research. UNCLOS is the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, and Canada's submission is actually due next week. 2013, they're coming in the first week of December with it. I just called last week to NRCan office in Nova Scotia, Dr. Jacob Perhoff. You'll see him in some of the photos that are going around there. Been with the Arctic Project for a long time. Mentioned why I was calling, just curious. And he got effusive right away, although he said it's sort of secret until we actually table it, but our claim looks pretty good. So ultimately, when this is all analyzed internationally by the UN, we hope that there will be a claim that arises from all this that says that all that goodies out there off the continental shelf, in fact, are Canadian. And as you know, the same studies and claims are being made in different parts of the Arctic basin by other nations. The CESAR operation was conducted by what was then called the Polar Shelf Project. It was originally EMR, Energy Mines and Resources, now NRCan, basically the same. In the earlier versions, iterations of that organization, they actually did the research themselves. They had their own scientists. They have close linkages with a number of universities in Canada, Dalhousie in particular, and Memorial, to a lesser extent Manitoba and Alberta. But the NRCan is the sort of core initiative. Now they have a big camp in Resolute, and if you've got there recently have probably seen the Polar Shelf Camp, and it's now a base for other accredited scientific expeditions. They don't actually conduct them themselves, they support them like a chandler, I suppose. Just a side note, about 3 years ago I saw an obituary in the paper for Dr. Hans Weber. He was the fellow in the blue toque, decidedly German accent, German-born Canadian, was Mr. Arctic for the longest time. He and his whole family, in fact, have made a number of contributions to our definition of the North in winter. Dr. Weber's been up north significantly. His wife actually created the Loppet in Gatineau, and I believe one son at least, Mark, I'm not sure his name, Mark Weber maybe, did a lot to do with long treks through the north on skis, so sort of a family thing there. Dr. Weber himself, in his obituary, there was a reference quote from a professor in Dalhousie University, a lady who actually is in the next clip you'll see in a bit. And I called her and I said, what do you know about this? And, you know, do you remember OpCESAR and so-and-so? So So about half an hour later, I got the phone extracted from my ear. Wildly enthusiastic. Said the material we pulled up there, fascinating, we're using it, and yeah, it was all made a lot of sense. The core samples that they pulled up during off-CESAR contain about 3 million years of history of the Arctic Ocean seabed. So that's the kind of sovereignty aspect of this. But back to the sexy stuff, the actual operation itself. I was the CO as a major there. I was not one of the 20 and 21-year-olds, but close enough. In Petawawa from 82 to 84. The rehearsal for the operation had already started the summer before. People will probably know John McPherson, Doug Neal. They had gone up to Resolute the summer before, or the winter before rather, to look at the best way of the reducing pressure ridges on the ocean ice. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the concept of pressure ridge. Very simply, currents and wind push thick ice up together, you get large pressure ridges caused by that kind of pressure. If they're old-year ice, multi-year ice, incredibly dense and hard, those have to be reduced obviously because to make a runway, and that was one of the first exercises, was to determine how to reduce them. No particular magic about that. You drill holes in them, blow them up with explosive, and level them down with a grader or other equipment. So that was tested the year before. We carried on when I arrived, and in February '83 we were into the final stages of testing. One of the things we had to do, you heard mentioned that there was a bulldozer and a grader drop there. The regiment at that time, and Mr. Patterson will pull me up sharp if I make a mistake here, okay, had dropped the bulldozer for D4 fairly regularly, but never the grader. And this was WAPCO, American Army Airborne, airportable thing, and a fairly strange structure. Obviously, all the weight's in one end, and it's got long wheels, and it makes pilots nervous because it goes out in the center of gravity, goes all to shit in the aircraft. So we had, in fact, had to contact the Airborne Center in Bragg, or Benning, to get information on rigging it. Turns out, here's how the 6 circles of Kevin Bacon continue to work. The LO down there at the time was a guy named Ray Honig, Patricia, just finished staff college with me. His daughter is an engineer, I think, who I met 2 years ago. So, as I say, I cease to be amazed anymore by these circles of connections. It's just the way life is. Anyway, we got the rigging information, went down to Trenton with it, with the riggers, and hooked up the grader, and had its first test drop in the big drop zone in Petawawa. And it was a heart stopper because the grader came out of the back of the plane, went completely upside down, and then slowly, as the parachute deployed, came back up again. And there was some resuscitation going on the ground because we had visions of this bucket of bolts, being dug out of that Anzio. So we said, okay, that was exciting, and the riggers talked to themselves and put some more straps and things on it. Dropped it again, did exactly the same thing, and opened just fine. So we said, we're not messing with success, we'll go with this, and that's what you saw there. Excuse me. In February, M.W. O'Neill and a small party went up north with the doctor, that crew you saw and the aircraft there, to look for the best site for the camp, the airfield, and the expedition. Well, I'll come back to that. Actually, it was delayed for a while. It was extremely cold, -50, -60, too much snow, of all things, and therefore the ice was too thin. They had a side scan sonar with them, I believe. I came onto the NMR side and eventually found a site that was close enough to meet the requirements, selected it, and a DZ party arrived from Alert. We had 4 aircraft in Thule, had deployed from Trenton the day before. One with a dozer, one with a grader, one with a bunch of stuff, one with fuel and explosives. So we left Thule, flew directly over Alert, which is, I guess, the most planes they've seen in a long time. Carried on to the drop zone, essentially a straight line from Thule. One aircraft, which was full of fuel and explosives, had to divert because of fire warnings and came the next day. So we arrived on the site there with 3 aircraft, the dozer, the grader, usual tent group stuff, small stores, fuel, explosives, even a 303 for polar bears, and 17 airborne engineers, which is mentioned a lot in the articles. There actually was 18, and I made my way on there just as an experience not to be missed, and also because it was a fairly high-risk venture. A very extreme jump. We had very high winds, well over 18 knots, Those of you who have any done this know that 8 knots is the maximum for a trainee, 12, 13 for a qualified jumper, and we were way up, at least 18. A very low ceiling of 800 feet, and a number of stop drops. Their joint force commander then was Colonel Ian Douglas. Some of you may know him, RCR, back watch. Finally authorized it, and it was, I guess you would call it a hairy jump. Lots of fun. We had 2 twin otters in the air beside us. You saw one of them there. They come from Bradley Air Services, now First Air. Used to be out of CART. Very experienced bush pilots, and everything you've ever possibly imagined about bush pilots, these guys embodied it. And they were just speechless. They were in the air, obviously. They didn't want to be on the ground with bulldozers plummeting out of the sky. You can understand that. And we're flying alongside the Hercs. And in fact, one of them took me back to alert later on. Just amazed at what had happened and what we were doing in the middle of literally nowhere. I went back to alert, south to alert. There's a phrase you don't hear too often. To set up a forward command post. We had to stop on the way, this twin otter, to pick up a British explorer who was bravely skiing to the North Pole. He wasn't well equipped, and he'd run into trouble with I guess he figured it was going to be like doing a nice lop-it, but it was very rough country, and stuff had broken, he'd run out of supplies. And we had to stop to pick him up. And there you are in the middle of this vast expanse. There's a little red dot. That was because they found him on GPS at the time. A little red dot in the middle of all these humps of snow. So I circled around, and plane came down, whoop, took off again. So I foolishly asked the engineer, why are we doing that? Because we're banked right over. He says, oh, let's check and see if water's coming through the ruts there. Otherwise, we know it's deep enough to land. So, okay. Landed, backed it up, picked this guy on who was bitching and complaining all the way. And I thought, you don't have to get on, you know. Got him on, and then the flight engineer said, would you mind helping me? We've got to move all these fuel drums to the back of the plane. Okay. Fuel drums back, because they carry their own fuel with them. And if you just sit right back there, please. And I said, I probably shouldn't ask this, but why are we doing this? And he said, well, it's a bit of a short little takeoff here, so we're going to get all the way to the back of the plane, and you'll get the nose up quick. And so, what do you say, bush pilot practices. Revved the thing up till everything was shaken and shot off into the air and took this guy to alert. Anyway, these were the Bradley Air Services folks who, as I say, were just amazed seeing this kind of thing happen in the north. The project officer was John Hampson. I believe he's spoken about this before, and he's still up north somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, doing something up there. Discovered that the snow was a lot deeper than they thought, so we had a second dozer rigged in Trenton, loaded it up, sent it up. Turned out that the head cook, chief cook, whatever the title was in Trenton, military fella, his son was a sapper up on the ice, so he loaded up the rig with lots of fresh food, because there were on hard rations there, dropped them as well. Again, small circles that we live in. The ice strip process of constructing it, fairly straightforward. Clear the snow, reduce the pressure ridges in the way I described. Drill holes, pump up water, level it out, get sufficient thickness. Sufficient thickness is an interesting concept because we didn't have much information on it. There was a couple of American documents from the Second World War in Alaska on the ice thicknesses. And it was sort of take that, add 50%, don't tell the pilots. One CEU came up, Tony Wojcik, some of you people may know Tony, was from one CEU, came up with MWO, Scotty Nicholson, who did the sort of proved the airfield and claimed, certified it ready for use. Marked up with paints and 45-gallon drums, surface roughed up with a grader, and the first of 35 Herc chocks came in, bringing in the scientists and their camp. The name of the first pilot is in that Sentinel article there. I suspect it's probably about the gentlest landing he ever made in his life, because this was a newbie for everybody. There was about 40 scientists and their support personnel in the camp, which was a combination of prefab things and tents, prefab canvas. I think we'll show you again if we have time at the end of the last little one. Finally, we sent some soldiers back in the spring to recover because we left our grader there, and other stores for the scientists as the ice field was breaking up. And in fact, the troops at that time had come out of Wainwright. We were in RV-83. It's just an indication of a small unit doing a whole bunch of stuff. So, where to from there? Now here's where I start to show my vast ignorance of the current state of play in the department, in the airborne world, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding now is that we're down to a basic individual jump capability of the company minus in each of the infantry regiments. I'm not aware if there are engineers still wearing a room rate anywhere. Mr. Patterson, is that the case?
In our squadron.
You've got some? Great. My suspicion or my understanding is that we're at the level of basic parachutist skill. We certainly, I don't believe, have dropped heavy equipment in a long time. I know that we still rig Magiate equipment in Trenton, so those are fairly large bundles. But I doubt that we even have small enough equipment anymore to airdrop, never mind rig. And given the government's stated preference and priority in the north, all this is very strange because there ain't no other way to get up there. So where that goes, I don't know. I've watched the airborne fraternity carry on through the center in Trenton. Seems to be a bit of a weekend jump club. Sorry, sound like a cranky old man here. Doing formation jumping with CT2s. I mean, that wasn't what we built those things for. Never mind. Rant over. I think it's a surprising loss of skills, and if we are really serious about the North, then airborne is one way to reintroduce that capacity. But it would take a big bag of money and a huge amount of political will. And for better or worse, the story of the past airborne regiment remains still floating around out in there. Interesting thing, if you look, there's a Sentinel article there, and if you looked at it, you notice that I was the author of it. In current operations, it's very unlikely that a commander would go out without being all lawyered up and with a public affairs officer on the other side. That wasn't the case then. In fact, nobody in Petawawa was terribly interested about this because it was an engineer function. PAOs, there were none. There were none at the base anyway. So if you wanted to make a story and make a claim for your unit, then you have to do it yourself. So that's the article. To conclude on the operation itself, I believe it was very well planned. Nothing to do with me. I just happened to do it by happenstance. Extremely well executed. It was high risk. There's no question there could have been other consequences to it. And up to that case, the early 80s, and still as we are today, as we were back in the 1800s, engineers contributing to Canada's soccer league. Are there any questions that I can answer on this? I'd like to show the last clip after that. Yes, Mark? Okay, this next little chunk here is the same reporter, Terry Molesky, before he became a jerk. He's up here on the ice talking about, and the second one is sort of scientifically focused, but I think it's important because it supports the other documents going on. You'll see the kind of things they were looking at. You'll see the enthusiasm, if not the evangelism, of the scientists that end up in the north. I guess everybody goes up north gets infected with the same thing. These guys, a lot of them live there, and okay, Jacques, lower away there. Love what they're doing. And you should see some public announcement in the next week or so of our submission to UNCLOS for our claim.
That's okay.
Well, that's schooling up just for interest. In that Sentinel edition, there's also an article about the Diefenbunker, which is one of Dave's other loves.
Yeah, that's right. In the same Sentinel article, it's a Diefenbunker.
And who is your grader driven by? Sapper Dave Boyle?
Yep, passed away a month ago, I think. And
Colonel Commandant is actually quite an experienced twin otter pilot too from one of our trips up north, where the 440 squadron pilots let the Colonel Commandant fly.
Okay, we're going to go to the second clip here.
Tonight, a visit to the top of the world, to Ice Station CESAR, where a team of Canadian scientists is camped out near the North Pole. Enduring bone-chilling temperatures and violent windstorms, the team is investigating a huge submerged chain of mountains called the Alpha Ridge.
The reasons for the expedition? The scientists say they're scientific. The politicians say they're political. And there may also be military motivations. Terry Molesky of The National visited the camp and produced this report.
Man, it seems, is the only animal crazy enough to venture so far out on this frozen ocean.
Intelligent creatures like seals and polar bears stay away from this, the real polar deep freeze, a heaving, windswept expanse of sea ice where spectacular cracks can suddenly rip open the ice cap and just as suddenly freeze again. We are here, though, for human reasons, scientific, political, military. Imagine that you are a low-flying cruise missile. This is your fastest route between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Arctic is a strategic front line, and beneath this ice roam dozens of nuclear submarines, undetectable from the air, but able to suddenly poke through within easy striking range. Now, consider that way below on the seabed, there is a submerged mountain range as big as the Alps, but never mapped, the last uncharted geological feature on our planet. And just suppose that undersea ridge, the Alpha Ridge, may be Canadian, but the Canadians don't know. So now, an Arctic survival expert is building an igloo on the roof of the world.
I would like to have it.
Scientists are peering into the ocean through holes punched in the ice, and ancient mud is brought up from the Alpha Ridge, all this to answer a politician's question.
Is the Alpha Ridge part of Canada? Can we establish sovereignty in the area? Do we know enough about that area in terms of its resources? And it's important to establish that. As you know, with the law of the sea, we have 10 years after the signing of the treaty to establish our sovereignty, so we had better know what we're talking about when we go in.
This, then, is Ice Station CESAR. We are right off the map, on top of the globe, drifting slowly on the pack ice of the Arctic Ocean, about 400 kilometers from the North Pole. CESAR stands for Canadian Expedition to Study the Alpha Ridge, and if you could melt the ice and pump out the water, the ridge would appear running 1,300 kilometers along the seabed. We are not alone here. A Russian station, NP-25 for North Pole 25, is on the other end of the Alpha Ridge. They say they're studying the weather. But CESAR is studying Canada's uncertain northern border, trying to find out if the Alpha Ridge is part of Canada's continental shelf, and therefore part of our economic zone.
If there's a deep valley in between, and the Alpha Ridge is structurally separate from the continental shelf, then it's simply not part of our continental shelf.
Do you expect to find such a valley?
We don't know.
But you will find out.
Oh yes, we will find out within the next few weeks.
Few weeks.
Yes.
Hans Weber's job as chief scientist began 6 weeks ago.
DZ Caesar, roger, 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 over.
Using a small amateur camera, Dr. Weber's advance party witnessed an amazing polar paradrop by the Armed Forces airborne engineers who brought in heavy equipment to set up the ice station.
Temperature, -42, -42. Fine day, lovely day, over.
The engineers, all of them volunteers, even seemed to enjoy it. Even so, Dr. Weber's camera shows the early days here to be heavy going, building windbreaks out of snow blocks, bulldozing the snow off the ice to make a runway, and hanging on somehow to drill the first holes in the ice for the scientific team. All of this with temperatures at -40 and machinery in constant rebellion.
Oh, fuck, come on.
In a few days, though, the runway was ready for the first Hercules supply plane to try it out. And the ice held firm. Well, most of the time.
There was a crack across the runway, and it closed again. It was a marvelous thing to watch 6 feet of ice come together, bang, just like that, and heal itself again.
Brian Boyd is the camp manager. His empire, now complete, consists of a huddle of insulated tents where 36 scientists will live until the end of May, when the thinning ice gets a little too exciting. There is a sauna for the adventurous and a mess tent where the social action is. Inside, oceanographers, geophysicists, helicopter mechanics gather round to eat large and frequent meals. Dr. Weber plans a new experiment.
How the ice moves.
Presiding in here, though, is a man much given to impromptu jigs, the camp cook, Frank Benoit, an important man to know.
What's for lunch, Frank?
Stew!
What kind of stew?
No fish stew.
Benoit's stew is plentiful, and outside, the world is his deep freeze. Refrigeration is no problem. Water is. If you want fresh water, you have to hack it out of a salt-free iceberg trapped in the sea ice. Still, you can do that anytime you like, because the sun shines 24 hours a day. This picture was taken right at midnight. And there is one other rare sight here. One of the world's last experts in igloo building, Leif Lundgaarde.
And depends on what kind of igloo you like, the sleeping igloo you like to have low, you don't like to build it too high.
This architectural classic is an outhouse.
Very often we don't have tents, so we have to build our igloos, what to live in, and for outhouse if you don't like to take your pants down in the strong wind blowing snow.
But when this happens, it's no joke. About 10 days ago, Ice Station CESAR was just about blown away by a savage Arctic blizzard. In the ferocity of a storm like this, survival is the only priority. Exposed flesh can freeze in seconds. A snowdrift can cover your body in a minute. You can't see your feet. You get lost. For our TV crew, even your basic weather report becomes a challenge. This freak windstorm is what they call here a Condition 2. Condition 2 meaning it's as bad as it gets. It can't get any worse without all of these tents just blowing away. Well, the tents do not blow away. But even when the wind drops just a little, the temperature drops too. Now you listen to your footsteps echo through the ice, and you start to wonder, what are you doing here? It is about minus 30 degrees out here today, and with this vicious wind chill factor, it is effectively minus 58. Everywhere you look, there is nothing but thousands of kilometers of desolate ice, and around this point, you really have to ask yourself, well, who needs the Alpha Ridge? Who wants it? Let the Russians have it if they want it, which, by the way, they probably don't. Even so, the scientists working here neither know nor care if there are really valuable resources down there on the floor of the Arctic Ocean, much less who owns them. Do you feel that you're now floating on top of a part of Canada?
Well, we don't look at it that way. We're not interested.
I'm not part of some special team that has been sent out to confirm the sovereignty of the Alpha Ridge. No way. I'm here to help people investigate its nature, its extent, what is it made of, how did it get here, and what can we find out intelligently about it and tell the world about it.
They are scientists, not politicians. They look into the ice for scientific rewards, and they find them. First surprise, the ocean is alive. It teems with these inch-long transparent creatures called amphipods. They live on algae under the ice. And deeper down, shrimps.
We caught two of these, and they're rather interesting. So you have to do the Arctic science, I think, to really get into this stuff. Just say one final thing, and I know I'm pressing on your schedule here. The video, I knew there was a video. I recall this from my time in Petawawa, and when I read Dr. Weber's obituary, I got re-energized about CESAR. So go to the place that can never fail, which is the RSM net. Mr. Patterson contacted his colleagues in Petawawa, and somewhere in the dusty basements at CESAR came out this monstrous broadcast quality or broadcast size tape, which one place in Edmonton, in Ottawa here, could translate to that document there. So that's all we've got. Thank you for your time. Appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about our history. Have a good day.
Dave, just on behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you very much for the presentation. I personally did not know a lot about CESAR. I mean, I knew what it was, but I've learned a lot here today, and I really appreciate that. But I think it kind of underscores how we take a lot of the history that's being made by guys like you and even those still in uniform for granted, and how important it is to actually capture that. And Mark, I'd also like to thank you in front of the council for your efforts in actually bringing that to our attention in a whole number of areas where you're capturing that with the lunch and learn, and actually I think we're starting to take our history a lot more seriously in the engineers, and I think we should. I mean, we have every reason to be very proud of what we've been doing. And Dave, to me, that just scratches the itch in many ways. But there's, know, for example, the Northwest Highway System, we ran that after the Second World War. I don't think many of us really know about that, but that's a lot further south than where you were, but that's still a really important aspect of how the Canadian Forces developed the Arctic, but in particular at the time, the Royal Canadian Engineers developed the Arctic. And as I said, I think you just kind of whet our appetites. So thank you.